Do you believe that a single cup of hot cocoa on a rainy night could change the entire fate of a person? On a freezing rainy night at a street corner, a young boy sat curled up in a wheelchair, shivering, unnoticed by anyone. And then, a girl, just an ordinary employee at a laundromat, did what no one else dared to do. She opened the door, brought the boy inside, cleaned him up, cooked for him, and gave him his very first feeling of safety. But what she didn't know was that the person who had witnessed the entire scene was the boy's father, a powerful billionaire who had never believed in kindness, until that very moment. And so, from one seemingly anonymous act of compassion, an unimaginable door was opened, leading to fierce confrontations, shocking twists, and an ending she herself could never have dreamed of. What happened after that rainy night? Why did a kind-hearted woman almost lose everything? And what compelled the billionaire to personally show up at her shabby apartment with a gift no one could have expected? Today's story will make you believe in kindness again and help you understand that as long as you live with integrity, life will, sooner or later, answer you with its most extraordinary miracles. Natalie Brooks, a black woman in her 30s, had been working at Fresh Spin Laundry for over 7 years. Every day was the same. She juggled the exhausting tasks of washing, folding, and ironing hundreds of garments from early morning until late at night. Though her back ached constantly and her paycheck barely covered a modest apartment, Natalie never let exhaustion dull the kindness in her heart. That evening, a heavy rain poured down. Wind howled through the alleyways along Franklin Avenue, sweeping cold air into every gap in her clothes. Natalie was wiping the store floor, another long day nearly over, when she looked out the window and suddenly froze. A boy sat alone in a wheelchair, shivering in the bone-chilling rain. His thin jacket clung to his body, his dark hair was matted and wet, and his pale face looked ghostly. He was clutching a high-end wool blanket, clearly chosen with care, but it still wasn't enough to keep him warm in the freezing storm. Without hesitation, Natalie rushed to the door, letting the cold wind whip across her face. "Hey, sweetheart, what are you doing out here all alone?" Her voice was gentle, full of concern. The boy startled, his deep blue eyes hesitant. "I'm waiting for my dad. He said he'd be back in a few minutes." Natalie looked around. Not a single car, not a single soul on the slick sidewalk. She pressed her lips together. It wasn't the first time she'd seen a child left behind in the rain. "You can't sit out here like this. Come inside with me. It's warmer and I've got something I think you'll like." The boy hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Natalie gently pushed the wheelchair inside the shop. Warmth from the dryers filled the space. She grabbed a clean towel, draped it over his shoulders, then poured him a cup of hot cocoa from an old thermos. "My name's Natalie. What's yours?" she asked, offering a warm smile. "I'm Jamie," he replied softly, still clinging to the towel like it was a precious blanket. Natalie nodded. "Jamie is a strong name. I think you could use a little energy." She walked quickly to the back room and returned minutes later with a tin of homemade chocolate chip cookies, ones she had baked for the night shift staff. Jamie took a bite and his eyes lit up. "These are so good." She laughed. "The secret's a pinch of cinnamon. My grandma taught me that." But deep inside, Natalie couldn't help but wonder, how could a disabled child be left alone outside in the pouring rain? What she didn't know was that just across the street, inside a sleek black SUV parked silently, a man had been watching everything, his eyes cold, his face unreadable. That man was Graham Whitmore, billionaire founder of WhitTech, and Jamie's father. The laundry room of Fresh Spin Laundry was still buzzing with the constant whirring of spin cycles, and the faint scent of fabric softener lingered in the air. Natalie Brooks quietly gathered a pile of dirty towels from the cart, her eyes still glancing over at Jamie, the boy sitting beside an old dryer, hands wrapped around the cup of hot cocoa she had made for him earlier. He had stopped shivering. The hoodie was slowly drying on his body, but his eyes still held a deep weariness, not from the weather, but from something more. Natalie had met many people in hard situations, but this boy, there was something different about him. Suddenly, the shop door swung open. The bell chimed sharply, slicing through the stillness. A woman walked in, blonde hair neatly tucked beneath an expensive knit hat, wearing a hoodie, but her eyes gave away a sharp, icy presence. She walked straight toward Jamie, crouched down and smiled. "All right, kiddo, time to go." Jamie looked up, confused. "But I haven't finished my cocoa." Natalie stepped forward instinctively, placing herself between them. Something felt off. This woman didn't seem like family, even though her voice was friendly. Natalie's instincts told her something wasn't right. "And you are?" Natalie asked, her tone edged with caution. "I'm his aunt," the woman replied, shrugging slightly, her eyes now wary. Natalie turned to Jamie. "Is that true, sweetheart?" Jamie hesitated. He lowered his gaze, his hands tightening around the cocoa cup. "She came to pick me up." That was it. No confirmation, no denial. But Natalie had lived long enough to know that silence and averted eyes spoke louder than words. Still, she also knew her place. A black woman, working a manual job, questioning a stranger. It rarely led to anything but trouble. She swallowed her suspicion, then gently wrapped a cookie in wax paper and placed it in Jamie's hand. "Take this for the road. Make sure you eat, little guy." Jamie looked up, eyes full of gratitude. He smiled, his first smile of the day. "Thank you, Miss Natalie. You're the best." Natalie nodded and stepped back. The woman wheeled Jamie out of the shop. But just before they left, she turned back and gave Natalie a glance. A cold look, not of thanks, but of warning. As the door shut behind them, Natalie stood still. A heaviness settled in her chest, like she had just handed someone to the wrong person. But she knew she had no power to intervene. Still, deep in her heart, she made herself a promise. "If something's not right, I won't stay silent again." Meanwhile, across the street, inside a sleek black Bentley, billionaire Graham Whitmore had just lowered his window. He had seen everything, every gesture, every look. And Natalie Brooks, the woman in the laundromat, had left an impression he wouldn't forget. Not because she knew his son, but because she saw him, truly saw him, while the rest of the world just walked by. He picked up his phone. His voice was low, firm. "Open a file on Natalie Brooks. I want to know everything." That evening, after finishing her shift at Fresh Spin Laundry, Natalie Brooks dragged herself back to her rundown apartment on the third floor of an aging building in the West Fayette neighborhood. Her shoes were soaked, her raincoat dripping, and all she wanted was to collapse onto her rickety old bed. But just as she closed the door behind her, a deep knock echoed through the room, startling her. She peeked through the peephole. A tall man stood outside, wearing an expensive black trench coat, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his eyes sharp and cold. His entire presence radiated something that could only come from wealth and power. Natalie didn't open the door. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice cautious. A pause. "My name is Graham Whitmore," he replied, his voice calm but resonant. "I don't mean to intrude. I just want to talk." The name made Natalie freeze. She didn't know much about him, but she had heard the name in passing. The billionaire founder of WhitTech, one of the largest tech corporations in the country. Her instincts told her to stay away. But then the image of little Jamie flashed through her mind. She sighed and opened the door slightly, just enough to clearly see his face. "You're Jamie's father?" she asked, still guarded. He nodded slowly. His face no longer carried the coldness from before. Instead, it showed weariness, and something that looked like gratitude. "I saw everything," Graham said. "I sat in my car that entire evening. I watched how you cared for him, fed him, wiped his face, even though you didn't know he was my son." Natalie stayed silent. Part of her felt awkward, another part angry at being watched. But he continued, "I don't believe in charity, but I do believe in debts that must be repaid." He pulled a thick envelope from his coat and placed it on the wobbly table near the window. "This is an offer, a job at WhitTech, not janitorial work or making coffee. You'll work directly with me in the partnerships division. 6-figure salary, full benefits. You have a talent I need." Natalie's eyes widened. She stared at him as if trying to figure out whether this was some kind of cruel joke. Years of hard work, and no one had ever truly seen her worth. "Why me?" she asked, her voice tightening. Graham Whitmore looked at her, and for the first time his eyes carried genuine emotion. Because you were the first to not see a disabled boy or a potential check. You simply saw a cold child who needed help. She looked down at the envelope, then back at him. And in that moment, it wasn't just a job offer. It was a door. A door that could lead her life into an entirely new chapter. Natalie didn't say a word. She simply nodded, and that was when everything began to change. 2 weeks after that fateful meeting, Natalie Brooks stepped into the headquarters of WIT-Tech, a towering glass building where the reflections shimmered like a dream she had never dared to imagine. The steel-lined elevator carried her to the 49th floor, home to the executive offices. Every step she took echoed through the quiet, high-pressure atmosphere. Her fitted blazer was borrowed from a close friend. Her heels were second-hand. Everything she wore was modest. But not her eyes. They held the look of someone who had weathered storms. Graham Whitmore was waiting for her. In a minimalist yet elegant office with a sweeping view of the city, he stood gazing out the window, a cup of coffee tilting idly in his hand. "You're right on time," he said, turning to her, a slight curve to his lips. "I don't make a habit of keeping people waiting," Natalie replied firmly. Graham nodded and motioned for her to take a seat. Then he slid a folder across the desk toward her. "This is a new partnership project. We're about to expand our community programs, supporting small businesses and helping women entrepreneurs in low-income areas. I want you to lead the communications and partnerships team." Natalie raised an eyebrow. She had assumed she'd come in as an entry-level employee, clueless and unnoticed. But Graham shook his head, as if reading her mind. "I don't need someone with an MBA. I need someone who understands what's real, what's human. And you, Natalie, you are the embodiment of that." Though she had braced herself, Natalie still felt a tightness in her chest. She had spent her life working at Fresh Spin Laundry, surviving day by day on tips and resilience. Now she was here, sitting before one of the most powerful men in the country, being handed an opportunity that could change not just her life, but the lives of people all around her. Not long after, Natalie began the job. At first, it was tough meetings with arrogant executives, dense proposal decks, and skeptical stares. But before long, through her intelligence, sincerity, and grit, the kind forged through years of hard work, she caught the attention of the entire company. She proposed community outreach campaigns, built educational funds for underprivileged children, and offered insights no one in their expensive suits had ever thought of. The more they worked together, the more Graham trusted her. "Natalie," he said one evening after work, as they stood together overlooking the glowing city below, "I used to think the world ran on efficiency and control. But you've shown me that sometimes a hot meal and a loving gaze can change everything." Natalie had begun to make her mark at WIT-Tech. The community projects she led not only drew media attention, but also made even long-time executives see her in a new light. She wasn't just a special case Graham had hired out of sentiment. She was a capable, courageous woman. But not every look she received was kind. One late afternoon, just after Natalie wrapped up a successful presentation with city partners, she received an urgent email from the legal department. A highly confidential internal document had been leaked, and the sending email address was hers. She froze, her hand gripping the computer mouse tightly. Her heartbeat pounded. The four walls around her felt like they were closing in. "That can't be." "I didn't," she whispered. But the evidence was there. The email had come from her account. And now executives were whispering about the new hire with no proper background. They began to scrutinize. They began to avoid her. A few hours later, Natalie was summoned to an emergency meeting. She entered a room with 12 men in dark suits, seated around a long boardroom table that stretched like the horizon. Every one of them turned toward her. No one smiled. Graham was there too. But he sat silent, his expression stern, unreadable. "We'd like you to explain the internal data leak," one of the board members said, his voice sharp like a blade slicing the air. "I didn't do it," Natalie replied, eyes locked forward. Her voice did not waver. But inside, her heart was a storm. "The evidence shows the email came from your account," the man continued. "I was set up," she said, calmer than she expected herself to be. A beat of silence, then Graham nodded slightly. He took a USB drive from his suit pocket and plugged it into the projector. The screen lit up. Security camera footage. The slowed-down video. A man entering Natalie's office just after she had left. The lighting dim, but the figure was familiar. Royce, a mid-level manager who had quietly resented her from the start. Someone who had never accepted that a former laundromat worker could sit as his equal. Next, footage of Royce using Natalie's laptop in her absence, sending the email containing the confidential document. The entire room fell silent. Natalie stood tall, back straight, eyes glassy. She said nothing, but inside was a tidal wave of emotion. Rage, pain, and a flood of overwhelming relief. Graham finally spoke, his voice deep and clear like a judge's gavel. "Royce is terminated effective immediately. We will be turning this matter over to the authorities." He turned to Natalie. This time his gaze wasn't cold. It was the gaze of someone who understood, deeply. "You haven't just passed one of the toughest tests. You've proven your integrity in the face of a storm. And from this moment forward, Natalie, you are no longer on probation." He stood, walked toward her and handed her a small velvet box. She opened it. Inside was a silver badge, engraved beautifully. "Director of Community Impact, Natalie Brooks." Her voice caught in her throat. I don't know what to say." "Just keep being yourself," Graham replied gently. "You've already exceeded every expectation." And in that moment, Natalie realized she was no longer the woman who had quietly endured behind the counter of Fresh Spin Laundry. She was now standing at the heart of one of the nation's leading corporations, not out of pity, but because of her true worth. 2 weeks after the truth came to light, Natalie Brooks was no longer an unfamiliar name at WhitTech. She had become a symbol of integrity, of resilience rising from the bottom of society, and the clearest proof of a new philosophy that Graham Whitmore was determined to infuse throughout his empire. Talent doesn't depend on where you come from, but on how you live. That day was a special morning. The WhitTech headquarters was radiant with light. The press had been invited, and employees from across the company gathered in the grand auditorium, though no one knew exactly what was about to happen. Graham stepped onto the stage. The powerful man wore simpler clothing than usual today. His face was softer, absent the usual sharpness. "Today," he began, "I want to tell you about a woman I once underestimated, until she made this entire company pause and learn to see the world through eyes of kindness." After a few opening remarks, Graham gestured toward the back of the hall. The doors opened. Natalie entered. She wore an elegant navy blue dress, her hair neatly tied up. Yet her eyes were still the same. The eyes of the woman who once stood behind the counter at Fresh Spin Laundry, strong, grounded, and sincere. The hall rose in thunderous applause. Graham welcomed her onto the stage, then handed her a firm envelope sealed with red wax. "Natalie Brooks," he said, "starting today, you are officially appointed as Vice President of Social Equity and Innovation, a role dedicated to advancing community empowerment and fairness. And," he paused, his gaze softening, "I have a small gift for you." The screen behind them lit up. An image appeared, a modern wooden house on a gentle hill, with a garden, a koi pond, and sunlight streaming through tall glass windows. A message appeared, "Welcome home, Natalie Brooks." For a few seconds, the entire hall went quiet. Natalie covered her mouth, her eyes welled with tears. "This house is entirely yours," Graham continued. "No mortgage, no conditions. And each month, you'll receive passive income from a new community development fund named after you, the Brooks Foundation, sponsored by WhitTech to support women like you once were." She couldn't hold back the tears anymore. I used to only wish I could pay rent on time. I never dared dream this big." Her voice trembled. "Thank you. But not just for the reward. Thank you for making me feel seen, for making me feel recognized." Graham smiled. "You're not just seen, Natalie. You're lighting the way for so many others." From that day on, Natalie was more than a senior executive at WhitTech. She became a keynote speaker at universities, a partner to dozens of non-profit organizations. Her little house on the hill wasn't just her home. It became a space where she hosted free weekend career workshops for single mothers, immigrant workers, and young people lost at life's crossroads. Every day she wrote a single line in her journal, "Be kind even when no one is watching." Because maybe someone is quietly standing on the other side of the street. There are moments that seem so small. A cup of cocoa, a smile, a gentle hug at the door of a laundromat. And yet they can change a person's entire life. Natalie never asked for anything more than to help a shivering boy in the cold rain. But that act of kindness reached the heart of a billionaire. And from there she was given the chance not only to transform her own life, but to become an inspiration, a guiding light for countless others. You see, sometimes kindness doesn't need to be loud. Just live with compassion, true to your heart, and the universe will take care of the rest. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Every message you leave is a part of spreading this circle of goodness. Don't forget to hit like if you believe in the power of kindness, and subscribe to the channel so that each day you can start with an inspiring story, just like today. See you in the next video.